all your thoughts a fighting chance. Ask your fears and doubts, would you like to dance? And open up your eyes. See the world and let the world see you. Take the time to love the things you do, and you hear it when your spirit starts to rise.
Hello, I'm Christian O'Neill. Welcome to Path to Wellness. This is a show where we provide our viewers with information regarding the wide variety of approaches to health and healing that are found throughout our society. Shakespeare once wrote, "The grief that does not speak whispers the o'erfraught heart and bids it break." I wonder if he could have been referring to unresolved trauma. Anyone can attest to the fact that pain is as much a part of life as joy. In fact, for many, the painful aspects of life far outweigh the joyful. While avoiding the slings and arrows of life may be an impossibility, it is clear that humans have a wide range of ability when it comes to dealing with the trauma they have experienced. Some are able to alchemize their most painful moments into the fuel that powers their greatest achievements. For others, however, traumatic events serve as a confirmation of all they believe is wrong with the world and, sadly, with themselves. Our guest today is an expert in helping individuals recover from the trauma they've experienced. Dr. Robert Weisz holds a PhD in clinical psychology and maintains a private practice in Santa Fe. Additionally, Dr. Weisz is also a practicing hypnotherapist as well as a trainer, consultant, and life coach. Dr. Weisz has an extensive CV, having authored a number of professional papers, and has also served as a faculty member for a number of universities, including the University of New Mexico School of Medicine. Today, Dr. Weisz is going to share his knowledge and expertise of a psychotherapeutic technique known as Brainspotting, a technique which appears to be providing clinicians with a powerful means of assisting clients in working through their previously unresolved trauma. So welcome, Dr. Weisz. I appreciate you coming on.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Okay. So maybe we should just start out and give the viewers a working definition of trauma.
Yes, I think that's important because trauma is a part of everybody's life. And the basic definition of trauma is any experience in which the individual experiences some powerful amount of physical or emotional injury, both physical and emotional. That person is helpless and powerless to do anything about the situation. And the person does not have the opportunity to release the energy of that experience or to work it out or to talk about it to someone else. And so the energy of that experience becomes lodged in the nervous system as, I would call it, the energy of trauma. And what happens over time is that there is something that we would call metaphorically a trauma reservoir. And what happens is that the life trauma that that individual experiences that doesn't get worked out, that doesn't get cleared, accumulates over time in that trauma reservoir. And so all of us have a trauma reservoir because all of us experience some level of trauma in our lives.
Mm-hmm. Now, there's some people that in their minds, they didn't experience trauma because they weren't sexually abused, physically abused, they weren't in a car accident. Yeah. And what would you say to that?
Well, we like to talk about the big traumas with a big T, and those are the sexual assaults and the earthquakes and the murders and the big car accidents and the big injuries. And then there's the little traumas, and those are the humiliations and the bullying and the rejections and the ends of painful relationships and not being approved by your peers, losing your job, experiencing some kind of misfortune that has a fair amount of emotional pain, and it doesn't get worked out. Okay. So we've got the big traumas and the little traumas. Mm-hmm. So you can have a pretty good trauma reservoir without having to have one of the big dramatic trauma events.
Okay. And is it fair to say that some people, like someone's response to trauma, they could be responding in a very dysfunctional way to what objectively some people would say was a little t trauma?
That's right.
Is that true? So you can't just look at it and say, hey, you didn't have any of the big trauma, so you shouldn't be suffering this way.
It's useful to tell people that they shouldn't be suffering when they are suffering, for one thing. But what happens, you see, is that any given trauma is given the emotional energy that it has for that person based on the previous history that that person carries of trauma based on basically the size and the depth of their trauma reservoir. So people who are seriously traumatized, have a large trauma reservoir, are easily triggered into additional trauma by what seems to be a small event. That person is just kind of raw and hypersensitive, and in that case they're more easily injured. And so that small injury becomes another trauma that becomes a part of that person's trauma reservoir.
Okay, now what accounts for the fact that some people seem to be able to work through their trauma pretty successfully and move skillfully through life, while other people are just debilitated through their entire lives? What kind of accounts for that?
Well, there's a number of factors. What happens between the very young child and the mother in the first 2 years of life lays down a pretty powerful foundation of emotional resources for that person. And it basically gives that person some good ways of self-regulating and processing emotional experience. And so those people are likely to move through what seems traumatic to someone else and go through it and work it out and basically be unharmed, and they're not adding to their trauma reservoir. But people who say have a problematic relationship with their mother, especially in the early years, the mother's either preoccupied or disturbed, or there's an alcoholic household, and there's a lot of danger in the air, or there's a lot of confusion within the parents, that child is not receiving a really good emotional foundation. This is called early attachment. It's extremely important in terms of the basic emotional equipment that we have for coping with the pressures of life.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so what are maybe some of the cardinal signs and symptoms that someone who isn't working through their trauma well at all, what would they demonstrate in their life?
Well, one of the most common symptoms is something we would call hypervigilance. The person is on constant alert because deep inside of their emotional body, they're ready for another injury, and they're ready to avoid it and try to escape it. So we've got hypervigilance. People who have trouble with what I would call emotional self-regulation. An incident happens that irritates them or hurts them or bothers them, and they can't seem to get past it, and it escalates very quickly into something much bigger and more difficult. So that's another one, emotional self-regulation. A lot of kind of unexplainable anxiety. It kind of goes with hypervigilance. Anxiety is a sign that at a deep level, that person is alert to danger all the time. In a sense, their radar is hypercharged. And so they're seeing danger where most of us wouldn't see it. That's another one. Another really interesting marker is a lot of physical illness. There's a very powerful link between trauma and susceptibility to illness and to, I would say, poor well-being. So people who have a lot of medical problems probably have some significant trauma history.
Okay. And also being prone to substance abuse, would you agree with that?
Yes. Being prone to substance abuse, being prone to abusive behavior themselves, being prone to delinquency and criminal kind of activity, being prone to just violence in general because they're not good at self-regulating. And there's also an interesting link between trauma and ADHD.
Interesting. Okay. Well, let me, maybe we could bring this right into brain spotting then. That's what we're here to talk about today.
Yes.
Why don't you introduce us to that?
Well, brain spotting is a new therapeutic modality that was discovered about 5 years ago by a mental health professional named Dr. David Grand, who's in New York. And he discovered that there was a very direct and focused way of stimulating the emotional part of our brain to process the emotional experience that we're focused on in terms of how it feels in our body. So the kind of the short description of brain spotting is it's a way of stimulating the brain to do deep emotional processing of a troubling or charged emotional situation, which includes trauma, but includes a lot of other things as well.
Okay. Now these brain spots, we talked about this when we were in your office, and it's also on your website. It's not necessarily an anatomical spot, but it's a functional neuronal network, maybe?
Yes. I would say it's the neuronal location in the brain, probably within the amygdala, which is part of the limbic brain, where there is a specific a collection of charged emotional memories around a specific issue.
Okay.
So the brain spot is literally that part of the brain that we are activating and processing with when we're using brain spotting.
Okay. All right, now without being too revelatory on my own show, I feel as if I may be helped by this type of therapy, and Dr. Weisz was good enough to actually take me through a session of brain spotting.
That's right.
And we have some video for that, so let's just go ahead and take a look at that, and it'll give the audience some idea of how this technique is employed.
So take a little scan of your body, especially your upper body, and see if you can notice anything right now.
There's a uneasiness in here.
Uneasiness in the chest, okay. Yeah. Keep paying attention to that. Part of this work is to help to create a certain level of mindfulness about your body experience right now. And so now I'm going to ask you to once again go back to the hypervigilance during your childhood when you had to be the guardian of the house, to guard against intruders. And I've got this wand in front of you that is just going to be used as a target for your eyes to follow. And what we're going to do is we're going to look for an eye position where that felt sense in your body is activated, is stimulated, feels stronger, is where we have a connection into your emotional brain, and that's where we're going to process. And you just notice at which eye position, follow the wand with your eyes. You can feel some increase in the sensory quality of those signs in your body. Just notice.
Breathing gets a little more shallow.
Yep. So it's getting a little stronger as we go further over here. This eye location, we seem to be accessing this emotional memory in your brain because it's making it a little more intense. Your attention is focused on your body. And now the brain spotting itself is going to begin to do something. And all you have to do is just maintain your attention on your body, the felt sense. Keep your eyes on that spot and just notice what happens inside. Yeah, so straighten your head again the way it was when we started. Open your eyes again. What are you aware of in the body right now?
It feels pretty, it's just easy.
Good.
My arms the numbness isn't there like it was. I'll notice changes in my breathing, where there was a shallowness and almost like a gasping a little bit. And then like at the end of this last one and the one before, I moved into a noticeable ease of breathing. And I would also say that the uneasiness in the stomach, it waxed and waned. You know, you would feel it and then it would recede a little bit. But again, at the end, it seemed to felt pretty comfortable.
And usually the first time we're just kind of opening up the system, but we're also, you can tell that something probably has shifted inside of you in relation to that. But it's not like a magic remedy where we just sort of pluck it out of your system and it's gone. But what we are doing is we're assisting your emotional brain to do its own kind of digestive processing, assimilation work, so that those memories are worked through, and then they're available to you as a resource rather than as a source of anxiety and hypervigilance.
Okay, so one thing I don't think we mentioned at first, I'm wearing headphones.
Yes, you are.
Tell us about that.
You're wearing headphones because we're having you listen to a very specific kind of sound and music recording. It's called bilateral music, and it's especially recorded and mastered so that your brain is stimulated on both sides. We're getting both hemispheres, the right and the left hemisphere, to kind of come on board as much as possible and participate in the processing. And what we find is that when both hemispheres are engaged that way, and the music helps to do that, helps them to be present and stimulated but calm at the same time, then the quality of the emotional processing seems to be enhanced and the process is more efficient.
Okay. So I do like to let the viewers know what my experience was like, and as they could see, I was very relaxed, and I felt like I was able to report my physical sensations pretty well, which isn't always easy for me. That's been a couple of weeks ago that we did that. No dramatic changes in my life. What typically, how many sessions of brain spotting do you see your clients needing?
I would say, if you asked me to say a typical number, I would say 6 to 10 sessions to resolve a lot of emotional issues and to do a big piece of work. Some people will need more, a few people will need less.
Okay. And what sorts of trauma does this technique lend itself to?
Well, this technique, Brainspotting, is useful for all types of trauma, from complex trauma, a lot of big trauma and little trauma kind of mixed together, to single trauma, to multiple trauma. So everything from veterans who come back from the front and are severely in a state of post-traumatic stress disorder, to the trauma of a car accident, to the trauma of the end of a relationship, to the trauma of being abused in childhood, of being sexually molested, to the trauma of having your partner leave you and disappear. So all kinds of trauma respond. And we're also dealing with physical trauma. I do a lot of work with people who are physically injured. And I do a lot of work with people who have severe medical illness. And there's an emotional component that becomes intertwined with that can definitely be relieved through the Brainspotting. It's also really good for pain problems. It helps to relieve pain because a huge amount of people's experience pain is actually the emotional component of relating to that pain and dreading it and anticipating more and feeling helpless.
Okay. So now I know this is a relatively new technique.
Yes, it is.
Is there, has there been any studies completed yet that we could find in the literature?
There are some studies underway at the University of Pittsburgh Medical School, but they have not yet been written up.
Okay.
So because Brainspotting is only about 4 to 5 years old, the clinical studies that are going to be reported in the literature are just now beginning to happen. Okay. But there's a lot of literature in a related modality, which is called EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. There's at least 400 clinical studies documenting the usefulness and the application of EMDR. And there's a great similarity in terms of the internal process that is stimulated between Brainspotting and EMDR.
Okay. So what is it about Brainspotting that's so exciting to you as a clinician? What makes this a real breakthrough?
Well, I was practicing with EMDR for 13 years before I discovered Brainspotting. And the moment I discovered Brainspotting, I realized that we could do everything that we were doing with EMDR, but we could do it in a more focused way, in a more contained way, and in a more respectful way, and do it faster. And since I'm interested in getting results as quickly as possible, while maintaining the safety of the clinical situation, the discovery of Brainspotting was like a godsend. I was able to do really deep emotional work within a few sessions with a lot of people. I was able to move through material that otherwise would have taken a lot longer. So money is saved, time is saved, and Brainspotting is a very respectful way of working with people. We're basically stimulating an inherent process within the person's nervous system. And we're being present in a respectful, mindful, and caring way. And basically the person is doing their work. And the work is being done deep inside the brain within some capacity that's inherent within the human organism to actually process emotional experience and derive some benefit from it.
Oh, that's really well put. That's a great explanation. Now let me ask you this. You've also mentioned to me that there's some applications for Brainspotting besides working through trauma.
Yes. Brainspotting is very useful for performance issues. Say you're an athlete and you're finding yourself blocked in terms of moving to the next level. Brainspotting is an extremely effective way of clearing the emotional blockages, which may be related to, say, the trauma of an injury in that athletic endeavor, or something else that happened that is blocking the smooth flow of energy and performance in that situation. So performance enhancement, performance problems, it's very good for stimulating creativity. I know a lot of people who just use that music, wear those earphones when they're painting or writing or doing some other creative work, and it stimulates the creative process. And it removes the blockages to the creative process. A lot of people who are creative people get blocked. And there's usually some emotional issue that interferes with the flow of the creative energy. Brainspotting is excellent at clearing that and unblocking it. It's also very good for helping people to connect deeply with resources, things that are connected to calmness and groundedness and a sense of balance and harmony. And so a lot of the clinical work in brain spotting actually has to do with first connecting people into those resources. Internal resources, it might be a relationship with a spiritual figure or an animal or a special place or a special situation that gives people a sense of really well-being and balance and ease. And so it's a good way of connecting people into that internal state and making it available for them very easily.
Interesting. Okay, now I think the viewers would be interested in, just sort of in general terms, maybe sharing some of the real breakthroughs that you have seen in some of your clients.
Okay.
Do some people must come to mind?
Yeah, I'm thinking of one gentleman in particular who was a recently discharged armed force veteran. He had been in the special forces and had done a lot of black operations and gone to a lot of the world's trouble spots to do things that he could not even begin to talk about. And he was just completely kind of almost frozen with trauma in his body. He had a lot of pain in his body as well from a physical injury, but this is a man who probably had not relaxed in 30 years. The interesting thing about this case was that he did not want to and really could not talk about his experiences. And so I didn't have to hear what had happened to him. I just asked him to tune in to the felt sense in his body. How does your body feel now when you just connect with some of the stuff that you can't talk about? And there was this maybe amazing amount of tension and pain and turmoil. By just focusing on that felt sense in the body and then finding the brain spot and processing that internal trauma, he was able to clear this massive amount of trauma. We worked for about 25, 30 sessions. And we not only cleared the trauma from all the warrior kind of stuff that he had done, but we also went into his childhood experiences, and he had an abusive father, and there was a lot of fear in the household. So here was a case where I did not have to hear what it was about. The brain spotting was able to process the trauma and clear it from his system, and he was a different person at the end of these sessions. He's now helping other veterans deal with wartime trauma.
Excellent. So is that what you meant a minute ago when you were saying it's a respectful way to do it? Because yes. I have a little bit of experience, not as much as you, but with talking with patients, and it can be, in a sense, a little kind of re-traumatizing.
Yes.
to open up again and share that again.
Yes.
Is that what you're getting at, this type of work?
Well, it's that people don't need to be retelling the story and get lost in the story and get trapped in the story. And they can also learn that the work that is happening is not about the story, it's about the way in which their body has stored all the trauma. The respectful part has to do with really the way in which a respectful clinical relationship creates a certain kind of energetic relationship connection that literally supports the deep processing of emotional material. So this respectful relationship, this caring, accepting relationship, plays an important part in helping the brain to open up and do the deep work that it can do.
Okay. And you mentioned, now this gentleman has now moved on and started working with other vets. I'm curious, to be trained as to be able to do brain spotting with
Yes.
someone, what does that look like?
Well, in terms of the professional qualifications, which are really needed, you need to have at least a master's degree in some kind of mental health discipline. Social work, counseling, psychology, occupational therapy, something like that. I'm also taught brain spotting to massage therapists and acupuncturists, a couple of physicians, a few nurses, because they are in a position to deal with patients in a way that allows them to do some very brief and focused brain spotting to help the person to respond to treatment.
Excellent.
That's a good tool for that.
Okay, great. Well, I think we're getting close to that time, so I want to make sure to get the viewers' contact information for Dr. Weisz. The website is www.robertweisz.com, and all the contact information is on there if they were interested in working with you.
It's actually at robertweissphd.com.
Oh, pardon me. I'm so sorry. I left that off. Okay,
Yeah.
and the graphic will be on the screen. We'll have it right.
Okay.
Okay, thank you for correcting me. But most of all, thanks for coming down and sharing. This is a really fascinating topic, and I appreciate you showing our viewers about it.
Well, it's a pleasure to talk about something that means a lot to me.
Excellent. it's time for our weekly book review called Desert Island Books. If you were stuck on a desert island and you had all your essentials taken care of, food, water, shelter, clothing, etc., and you had some room for some luxury items, these are books that you'd want to have with you. This week's book is Thoughts Without a Thinker by Mark Epstein, MD. Dr. Epstein is a psychiatrist in New York. He's actually an analyst, and he's also a long-term Buddhist practitioner. And this is just a really fascinating book. A lot of people are doing this, the kind of the synthesis of East and West, but I don't know of too many people that have done it better than Dr. Epstein. He's taking the best of Freud's insights and from traditional clinical psychiatric practice and combining them with the wisdom of Buddhism. And it's just really wonderful. I've read this book through twice. So I can definitely recommend it. I'm giving it Dr. O's Golden Stethoscope Award for sure. So check it out. Thoughts Without a Thinker, Mark Epstein, MD. Okay, very good. Well, it looks like it's about that time. We're going to end the show. Time to give thanks. First of all, I want to thank Dr. Robert Weisz for coming on the show and sharing his expertise with us today. I want to thank John, the producer. Without him, the show doesn't happen. I want to thank the rest of the crew, Erica and Ivy. I want to thank, quote unquote, for giving us the airtime. And most of all, I want to thank the viewers. If you like the show, come back and see us next week. Tell your friends about it. You can check us out online at www.pathstowellness.net. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, you can send them to me at dro@pathstowellness.net. Before we go, we do want to leave you with something to chew on. We call it the Cud. This week's Cud comes from the Bard of Avon, who wrote, "Things are neither good nor bad, but thinking makes them so." So thanks again, we're out of here. Until next week, remember, it's your body, learn to care for it. It's your mind, learn to focus it. It's your heart, learn to awaken it. Peace.
Keep on opening doors. Let the past pour out your pores. You cast hopefully.